Yes, guys, another preseason friendly in the bag. Collingwood versus Richmond. Now, this one wasn't as watchable as some of the other games. It didn't have the intensity because of the discrepancy in talent between the two teams out there tonight. But I think there are some big takeaways just the same. If you're a Collingwood fan and you're looking at the opportunity that they're going to have this year to sort of bounce back on that 2023 football that they played, I think that is definitely on the cards with a couple of moves that they've made onto that half back line. For Richmond, obviously there's less silver linings on this performance. It was a bit of a tough day. It got ugly at times, but if there's anything to take away from this, it's that Adamuzze probably has to be quite bold this season with giving opportunity to some of those key young players that are coming through. I'm not just talking about the draftees, but also the players that have been there for 2-3 years that are starting to blossom, but they definitely need some greater opportunity. And I wasn't 100% happy with what he did with the midfield tonight for a practice game. I think he could have given some more opportunity there, particularly with the players that he had available. So we'll have a look at the outs just to sort of go over some of the key personnel that weren't there to be able to allow the teams to play their game. Braden Maynard, Jordan De Goey, and Tom Mitchell, probably all best 23 starting options. Obviously, Jordan De Goey, a huge one in that midfield group, just to make that a little bit more of an offensive sort of option. They tonight clearly ran someone like a Steel side bottom who probably isn't going to do full-on midfield numbers throughout the year, and Braden Maynard is a key piece to that back line. The Tigers have a lot more outs, particularly with younger players. I think they just picked up a lot of injuries to their draftees, just little unusual things like the Sam Lawler broken jaw, I think Josh Smiley was soft tissue, but they've also got pretty experienced players out of this team too. Noah Bolter from the back line, he's a big out. Tom Lynch, just as a key position forward. Those forwards tried tonight, but they couldn't really compete aerially with the Collingwood defenders. Dion Prestia out of that midfield. When is he fit? I guess that's the question around him. Hugo Routhsmith gives them something a little bit different on the wing. You've got players like Lafayette, like Gibcus, who hasn't really been able to get fit. And then you've got Lawler, Smiley, and Alga all out of the team. So an under-strength Richmond team, but a lot of the players that would come back in wouldn't necessarily make them better right now, just given the youth the age that they are at the moment. And I think if you look at the stats for this game, I'll bring them up so you can sort of go along with me here. It's quite interesting. So you look at inside 50s there. Richmond only lost the inside 50 count by 2 for the entire game. You look at the hit-outs. They won the hit-outs by 8. Clearances, 43-40. So they actually even had a clearance dominance in this game to some degree. I think Collingwood were really on top early in the game in the clearances, and then they sort of faded a little bit. But it was just, and that's where you look at the Richmond midfield and you go, this midfield, it's just not quite balanced enough with Taranto, with Hopper, with Ross. I just don't think there's enough quality in there. And when they do win those clearances, if you look at the clearance numbers for this game, the Richmond players that won all the clearances were Taranto, Nankervis, Hopper. When they're going to be getting the ball in hand and kicking it forward, it's going to be pretty easy for the opposition to intercept the ball. And when you're playing a team like Collingwood, expect these sorts of things to happen because they just hurt you so much on the counter-attack. Josh Dacos, and that's where we're going to start here, I think. We're going to start with the Collingwood defence because it was really, really strong. Moore, Howe, Reef McInnes back there. I'm starting to like that combination. I've probably called for the last 6 months that, talking about the Nathan Murphy injury, what can Collingwood do to sort of reshape things to get a player to free up Darcy Moore a little bit more? Reef McInnes, although he's probably a little bit more of an offensive player and he's a little bit more undersized than someone like a Nathan Murphy, he does look like he has the ability to be able to win his own ball back a little bit as well and just help out Darcy Moore and Jeremy Howe there a little bit. So I like how that's looking. Of course, he's going to have to come up against stronger opposition to see how this experiment works. But so far, so good. Isaac Quaynor, he looked like he was back to his very best as well. A lot of intercepting back there, particularly the stuff at ground level. Won a lot of those D50 ground balls that are super important to facilitate for the 2 new signings. And really the premise of this video, and I think the biggest takeaway that Collingwood can have from the video is Josh Dacos and Dan Houston. You go through the major ball winners in this game, all the statistics, but the ones that you look at are the score involvements. And to have Josh Dacos with 7 score involvements, 3rd overall for the Pies, and Dan Houston 5 score involvements, 6th overall for the Pies, is pretty profound in the overall scheme of things when you've got, considering how many goals they kicked, how much scoring they did overall, to not have more midfielders and more forwards in that top end and have the D50 scorers. I think that's really interesting and tells a story about how Collingwood want to play. So I think if they continue that with Houston and Dacos, it's rare for a team to have two like such good ball movers off the back half. I think Dan Houston, his quality on the ball, his balance is just there to see. And he doesn't get involved in the game necessarily as much as like a Nick Dacos. He doesn't get as much of the ball, but when he has it, he just looks so calm. He doesn't get bothered when he even if he loses a defensive one-on-one back there as well, he just sort of steadies himself, calms himself, and then gets back into the play and always seems to be able to affect it. So awesome signing there for the Pies, and Josh Dacos to halfback. That is going to be lethal. Move up a little bit further to the midfield group. Darcy Cameron, probably in the ruck, got beaten by Nankervis a little bit today, but it didn't really matter because the players at ground level, some of those combination taps between he and Nick Dacos, who had 11 score involvements in 3 quarters in this game. So yin and yang when you talk about Richmond, when they won a clearance, it was sort of dirty ball inside forward 50 or not even making it inside forward 50. It was cut off by the Collingwood defenders who were able to transition the ball and score. When Dacos got centre clearances, he was the top centre clearance player for Collingwood on the day. He was really direct. He was dynamic. He used his speed and really showed up that Richmond midfield, which looked extremely slow and extremely worrying in the centre bounces tonight. I mean, the players that they played, I'll get into the Richmond team later, so I won't go into that too much. But yeah, it was concerning. Perryman looks really good in there as that defensive anchor, and I think that's going to look even better when you add DeGoey in there. Tonight, Sidebottom actually had 24 CBAs, so you'd imagine a large proportion of that when DeGoey gets fit and embeds back in the side, that a lot of those are going to go to Jordan DeGoey, and then Sidebottom's probably going to combination of maybe coming in off a wing, maybe half back, maybe a little bit of half forward as well. I sort of see him as being just a little bit of a Mr. Fix-It for the Pies. Wherever they need someone, he can just come in and fulfill a role because he is so versatile. They did inject Ed Allen into the game after 3/4 time, so he's a really interesting one. He probably hasn't quite done enough in this preseason to absolutely make himself a sure thing for selection, but he does, he looks all right when he does get an opportunity in there. It's just players ahead of him, I sort of can't see him getting in over any of those guys. And when DeGoey comes back, when Tom Mitchell comes back, he's probably still just going to be that next player into the side. May get some sub opportunities at some point. On the wings, you had Lipinski, you had Crisp, and Will Hoskin-Elliott was sort of rotating through there as well. Pretty standard for Collingwood. I mean, these guys have been sort of backing up. I think they're really important to what Collingwood do, particularly from a defensive point of view. Lipinski and Crisp and Will Hoskin-Elliott. Particularly Hoskin-Elliott, he does really do well at pushing up to be that sort of extra tall inside forward 50, but then he inverts and defends the corridor really well when they're on transition. Not that Richmond weren't absolutely lethal on transition tonight, so he didn't really get found out, but it is important overall to the game style what those players do. They sort of rotate and switch with each other depending on how the opposition is moving the ball as well. We talk about the key forwards for Collingwood. Dan McStay looked really, really damaging, and this forward line, with the tools that they have and the movement that they have with McStay, with Mychek, with Membry now, Membry getting up a little bit higher and just giving them a bit more of that outlet kick. So if they do get into trouble with the forward pressure, which Richmond, if I was going to get a positive takeaway from Richmond tonight, it was that forward pressure that they put on the Pies, and that obviously leads to some dump kicks as well. Having this sort of a forward line, having that extra aerial presence is going to help Collingwood, I believe, at times. If these three can stay fit, that is super, super important. You had Bobby Hill and you had Jamie Elliott as those sort of deeper small forwards. And then this is probably the high half forwards for Collingwood are a little bit of a question mark. So I talked about the transition from last season. So 2024, the defensive half scoring really fell away with Nick Dacos moving off half back. There were other reasons for that as well. I think Nathan Murphy's injury we talked about with Darcy Moore. Even Quaynor's form dropped off considerably as well as a part of that whole dynamic of the back six. So they didn't get their scoring game going from the defensive half, but they did get it going a lot better from the forward half. So they sort of changed their game a lot just to suit what was happening for them at the time. It looks like they've gone back to that defensive half transition, but that is a little bit bucking the trend, I suppose, on what some of the other teams are doing. And you look at the high half forwards here in Schultz and McCreery, probably the two ones that, get up to stoppage. And compared to some of what I'm witnessing from teams like Essendon and North Melbourne when I go and watch their training sessions and their intra-clubs and so forth, is their high half forwards can kick the ball inside 50 really surgically. Like Nick Martin, Zach Merritt the other night. You had Sheasel, McKercher for North Melbourne, those sorts of players. Do Schultz and McCreery, they do have a lot of physicality. I'll give them that. So they get high up the ground. Schultz particularly, he just sort of gets in and under and, he wins free kicks. He's physical. He can run. He can jump, all of those sorts of things. McCreery's got that explosive pace out of stoppage as well. But do they have the nous? Do they have the kicking? And they're going to have to sort of work that out, how that's going to work. Obviously, having Houston and Josh Dacos off the half back line, that sort of works, but it's just how this game plan is going to work, and against some of those other teams, how is it going to look? It's going to be interesting when they come up against better opposition, I suppose. So, and if we're taking away the result of this game sort of holistically, you do have to look at the fact that Collingwood was so efficient inside 50 tonight. I don't think when you juxtapose this performance against Collingwood playing a better team, a team that defends the D50 a lot better, those surgical kicks and that precision is going to be a little bit more necessary, I suppose. So that's it for Collingwood. You can't really knock anything that they did in this performance. Everything looked super dynamic and super exciting. So we'll move on to the Tigers, who ran a pretty tight midfield group, it has to be said. And this is probably a criticism I had of them in this game, just not trying more things to inject a little bit of pace, a little bit of bite. Something different just to go with these Collingwood mids would have been nice, but Nankervis was in the ruck most of the time. He did really well from a hit-out perspective. Thomas Sims came in the second half, and they also ran Samson Ryan through there at different times. It's interesting how they're going to do this with those three players. Nankervis had 7 clearances, which I wasn't too happy with myself. I wouldn't really want Nankervis getting 7 clearances. You're going to get a lot of dirty ball and a lot of turnovers at D50. Ross had 15 CBAs, Taranto 23, McIntosh 16, and Hopper 23. That is a pretty unathletic, sort of dour type midfield group. And you'd really want to see, from a Tigers perspective, you'd really want to see just a little bit more adventure from Adam Uze here. The others that sort of went through there were Thompson, Dow, McAuliffe came in the second half as well. So they did inject Ryan Mansell in for a few centre bounces, which I think I like that move, just to get a bit of creativity in there, a bit more speed, some dynamism. But yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to see McIntosh lining up in round 1. I know Josh Smiley and Sam Lawler are going to come back into the team early in the season, and you'd think that they're going to get some opportunity in there. But even just trying something a little bit different, maybe someone like a Seth Campbell, maybe someone like a James Tresice, who I'm really, really liking in this preseason. So from a wing perspective, we will bring in James Tresice there. Now, I think he only played the first half of the game. And from a defensive point of view, there's probably still a lot to be desired one-on-one there, playing in a new position on the wing. I think you have to give him some leeway on that and a bit of a mulligan. But I really like this guy when he gets on the ball. He just has that similar type movement that you see in someone like a Harry Sheasel. I've brought up Judd McVie in this preseason. He seems to be able to get out of traffic and hit targets. Yeah, he's going to make some mistakes because he's a young player and he's getting into that role, and he doesn't have the pure accumulation ability of some of those players yet. But I like a lot of the traits that I see from him so far. We saw him play more of a half-back role, and he was a really good intercepting option as well. So if he can sort of rotate between this wing, maybe play a little bit of midfield, play a little bit of half-back, similar to what we saw from a Judd McVie last year, I could see a similar trajectory from him. And he's one that, in this Richmond ecosystem, gets a little bit forgotten about because he is sort of a second, third year type player, whereas we're talking about all the draftees from 2024 as well. So really impressed with what he did. Not necessarily his most favourable position, I wouldn't have thought, but loving what he's doing. Seth Campbell, he played a bit of wing as well as high half forward. I love what Seth Campbell does. I think at the moment he's one of the most exciting players in this Richmond team. He reminds me a little bit of someone like a Dylan Moore, who's got really strong running ability, can get up to stoppage, has physicality in his game to impact at the stoppage and then get back to goal. And he has a bit of speed and a bit of class as well. So something that Richmond really lack. I think when Hugo Ralphsmith comes back, he'll take up one of these wing positions. I'd probably like to see maybe Ralphsmith and Seth Campbell running these wings, maybe even a Banks, but he's sort of gone into this half-back role. So we'll have to talk about that as well. Now, the forward line, the key position players are extremely underdeveloped at this point for the Tigers, so you can't expect too much aerial presence here, and they're going to get beaten one-on-one by the defenders, and then you're going to be able to transition the footy against them. That's just a given. But the forward pressure was really good from the small. So Mansell, Maurice Rioli, Tyler Sonsi, Steely Green, all of those players did a really good job at just bringing the heat on the Collingwood defenders. Now, they were still able to score heavily from the back half, but the amount of time in forward half they actually shaded it a little bit, Richmond, in this game, which is pretty surprising. So they had the ball inside their forward 50 more often than Collingwood. They weren't able to put that on the scoreboard, of course, but that's a pretty good sign that these players are buying into what they want to do, and you've got to really give those small forwards credit. I don't think that's a Mansell, Rioli, Sonsi, Steely Green. I'm not sure if that's a finished product. You probably want a little bit more quality in there. But they did a really good job in this game and supported those key position forwards who, were beaten by their defenders. Jacob Bauer, though, this guy has to play more football. He played, I think, a couple of games in 2024. I don't have the actual number there. Was really great from a contested marking point of view already from just a small amount of games that he played. I think he might have started as a defender and then gone forward. This guy has athleticism and he has aerial presence, and most importantly, he has competitiveness in the air. So he was the most dangerous key position forward for the Tigers. Liam Fawcett was down there. Harry Armstrong was down there as well, but Bauer really stood out. Harry Armstrong definitely needs a little bit more time just to, I guess, get the work rate of some of these key position forwards. We kind of compared him to someone like a Cadman last season. He just doesn't have that running ability to get up the ground and get more of the football. So something he'll have to work on, and I don't think he'll be lining up round one just yet. Just needs a bit more development. From a defensive point of view, without skipping over those forwards too much, I mean, I just want to... One more thing I'll say about Mansell is just what a player he is going to be in the next couple of years. Reminds me a little bit of a Bobby Hill, that type of player where he's sort of a small hybrid, maybe can go up into centre bounces like we saw tonight and impact the game from there as well. So he's a really exciting one. And again, some of these names that we're hearing here, Tresice, Bauer, Mansell, they're the players that probably get forgotten, like I said, in the Richmond ecosystem. So defenders were Miller, who sort of took the biggest key, like a McStay. You had Blight, who's looking pretty good back there as an interceptor. Broad, Vlosten, and then your sort of more running defenders, more higher halfbacks. You had Tom Brown, Jaden Short, Sam Banks in a new role. So Jaden Short was really good from a meters game perspective. He's important, and particularly with Dan Rioli going out of the side, he's going to have to do a lot of the ball moving back there. And he's probably the best kick in the team and actually just gives them some more precision with their kicking and ability to be able to hang on to the ball and just control things a little bit. Banks back there as that sort of higher defender. He looks pretty good so far. I'm still, maybe I'd prefer him on a wing and then getting the ball into the hands of someone like a Tresice on the half back line, but this seems to be the way that they're going. So he's done pretty well. He has that sort of competitiveness in his game to play on some of those smaller, medium type forwards as well. So he's doing a pretty good job. Luke Traynor comes on in the second half, and I think he was really impressive, and fans got to see what he can do from a defensive point of view and offensive point of view as well. So he has that ability to be able to lock down, to intercept the footy and to kick it as well. So he's going to be really important in this rebuild to, when players like Broad and Vlosten and those types start to get phased out of the team, he's going to be really important in that as well. So I think for Richmond overall, the biggest thing would be just about being a little bit bold this season with their selection. I want to see plenty of games into Mansell, into Bauer, into Tresice, into Tom Brown. I think they're the future that can really impact the game from a now point of view, but they're also going to have to get some of this youth that was missing tonight into that, particularly into that midfield group. So if you have performances like this where you lose by 70, 80 points, at least you've got some games into those guys, some experience into those guys, and you can play in that midfield group. You can play Taranto, you can play Hoppy, you can play Taranto and Ross, and then one of the younger midfielders, but Lawler, Smiley, Houghton when he's available after the knee, and also Jasper Alga as well. Really have to start getting some minutes into this team so we can see what they're made of. And the fast tracking of those players that I mentioned off the top as well is really important. That is a wrap and my takeaways from this game, guys. If you're a Collingwood supporter or a Richmond supporter, let me know what you thought of the game, and I'll see you guys next time.